A lot of people talk about music theory as if it's like a set of rules that you have to follow to play like proper music, and that's not quite how it works. Imagine learning another language, and maybe you start off at the level of just being able to say words. So you can pronounce words really well, and maybe you don't even remember necessarily what those words mean, but you know you can pronounce them well. And in music, that's sort of like being able to play a few chords or being able to play like part of a song. Maybe you memorize like a travel phrase and you say, you know, in the most American Spanish possible, like "Donde está el baño?" or something, right? That would be like, I have memorized a phrase, I know what that phrase means, it means where's the bathroom, but I'm not really like putting my own thoughts out there in the world. When you get to a certain point in that language, you start to be able to share your own thoughts. You start to be able to write down your ideas in that language. You start to be able to get picky or about the specific syntax or the specific nouns and verbs you want to use, and you start getting to know the grammar of that language. You can start listening to poetry in that language and appreciate the rhyme scheme and the clever, you know, plays on words and things like that. And with music theory, I think that's a more accurate comparison to say that like music theory is sort of like learning like linguistics and grammar and syntax and stuff for a language, where linguistics is basically describing how a language works and not prescribing how it should work. Right? Languages evolve over time, and languages develop and change, and music does the same thing too. And music theory is sort of a way of describing, here's the basic things that a lot of certain music, has in common, and then here are the ways that these music things are different. And so what I want to start with today is I want to start with the idea of being in a key and what that means. And in order to do that, I have to talk about scales. But before we get into scales, and before we get into like, oh, is music theory really boring? Like, we talked about kind of what it is. We should probably talk about why you should learn it and how useful it can be. So essentially, I mean, if you imagine the language analogy again, if you learn some travel phrases and go to a foreign country, you can probably get around, but you're not going to really have many conversations with people who speak that language, and you're probably not going to understand what is said in any sort of nuanced way. It's just going to be like, here are the words I understand, here's the words I don't. With music, it seems to be there's this big missing piece in a lot of people's music education where you learn the technique, you learn the songs, sometimes you even learn music theory, but then you are never invited to participate in the sort of composing or even just like experimenting or exploring or improvising aspect of music. And learning music theory helps you do that kind of thing so much easier. It also helps you learn songs by ear. It also helps you play music with other people. It helps you write parts to music that other people have already written. It makes it more fun to jam with other people because you're not stuck playing open chords or pentatonic scales. You can kind of explore a lot more variety. How do we start with, here's a scale, and then we end up with, here's how you can use a scale to write music and play by ear and play music with other people in fun ways? And I want to show you how. So we're going to start with the most basic thing. What is a key? And in my opinion, a key, as in K-E-Y, that is the most fundamental part of music theory to understand. And if you can understand that, almost all of music theory makes sense. So a key is not a scale, but is based on a scale. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start with a major scale, and we're going to talk about what a major scale is. A major scale is when you start on any note, and then you apply this formula. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So let's say here's a D, right? There's another D down here, another one over here, right? These are all the available D notes in the vicinity. So if I play a note, and then I move up the neck, in other words, toward the body, 1 fret, I have moved 1 half step. If I play a note and then I skip a fret, that is called a whole step. So a major scale starts on a note, and then it goes through this formula of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now, I just left the neck there, but that's because I want to talk about something else here. So, in order to play a scale, you've got to have two things. You've got to have every note of the musical alphabet in your scale. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's the whole musical alphabet. And you have to have every note of the scale in order, and you can't skip any notes or have duplicates of any notes. So this is where sharps and flats come in. And this is one of the weird things about music that for now we'll just have to let it be weird. So if you look at my little chart up, I forget how to point, right here, what you can see is there are some notes that have a sharp and flat between them and some don't. Let's review those right now. So if we start on D and we move up a half step, well, that's D sharp. It's also E flat. It depends on the situation, which we'll talk about. So between D and E, there is a sharp. Between E and F, there is no sharp. Between F and G, there is a sharp or flat. It's either F sharp or we can call it G flat. Same with between G, which I'll play on the next string here, G and A, they get a half step between, or a whole step between them, which means there's either G sharp or A flat. Same with A to B, there's a sharp or flat between them. It's either A sharp or B flat. And then B and C, just like F and E, they have no sharp or flat between them. And I promise this will be relevant and interesting in a minute, but C to D does have a sharp or flat between. Right, we can either call it D flat or C sharp. And the reason we call it D flat or C sharp is because of those rules I talked about earlier, which I'll show you in a second here. So if we want to make a D major scale, what we can do, and we can do this a couple different ways. We can say, okay, let's start on D, and then let's write out the whole alphabet from D. So we can go D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. Okay, so if I start on D and I go up to E, okay, we got to follow this formula. So we've got whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So now we're going to go through and we're going to double check. Is this correct? So we got D to E. That's a whole step. I'm actually going to pop it in there because that's correct. So D to E, that's a whole step. Should be a whole step according to the formula right here. What about E to F? Uh-oh. That's a half step, and it should be a whole step. So this is where we go to F sharp. And the reason we call this note F sharp, hang on, let me get the right color ink here. We call this note F sharp instead of G flat, because if we call this note G flat, we're skipping F, and it looks like G flat to G is a half step. So that would mean we're breaking one of those rules we talked about earlier. We're skipping a note of the scale. We're going straight from E to G, and then we're playing another G to get back on track. So this is why there is an F sharp in the key of D major and not a G flat. So if we continue, we already figured out there's an F sharp, which we have to call F sharp, right? And then there's a G. So we got start on a note, and we got whole, whole, half, and I'll play on the next string here. And then we've got another whole step, which that works out, that's an A. And then we got another whole step to B, so I'm going to put those two in, A and B. And then B to C, oh, that's a half step. Well, in order to make it a whole step, we got to play C sharp. And now, instead of erasing it, I should put a sharp there, like this. So this is a D major scale. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. Let's pop that one in there. And then D. So D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. Very cool. Now, for reasons that I think will be pretty obvious if you think about it, I can't explain everything in music theory, or this would be like an hours and hours and hours long series, but this is basically the first lesson of my music theory for guitar series, where I go through scales. This is available on my Patreon, link in the description. Check it out. I think you'd be really happy with it. And this is actually the first series in a set of 2. The second series talks about chords in a key, which we'll also talk about a little bit today, but it goes a lot more in depth. Today's more of a crash course. So I can't talk about something like the circle of fifths other than to say what's cool about the key of D major is that a D major scale contains 2 sharps, an F sharp and a C sharp. And the cool thing about the circle of fifths is it's basically a filing cabinet, a way to organize all the different scales. So what this means is if we go up to the 5th note of the scale, that's what a perfect fifth is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we play the major scale formula starting on this note. Well, that key is going to include C sharp and F sharp, but it's going to add another sharp. And I can demonstrate that in a minute. But if we go down a fifth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we start a scale on this note, we're going to lose a sharp and we're going to keep one of them. So the circle of fifths basically says any scale that you play, if you move up to the 5th note of that scale and play the whole half formula right there, you're going to be adding a sharp. If you go back a fifth, you're going to be losing a sharp. And with flats, it's a similar kind of thing, which we could talk about too. But let's just talk about an A major scale by comparison. So if we start on A and we go whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Let's write that in. A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp, A. This scale contains almost all the same notes as that D major scale. In fact, it's 1 note off, and the note that it's off is G. In the key of A, in order to maintain that whole, whole, half formula, we need to have a G sharp, right? And again, all I'm doing is maintaining the major scale formula. If I go back, like we talked about, going back a fifth from D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we make a scale based on G, there's the root note, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Let's compare it to that D major scale again, which, let me put this up so you can remember it, right? D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. So if we think D, E, F sharp, G, well, it's almost identical. A, B, C sharp, D. That is a D major scale, but here we have a G scale, which is whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. This is how scales work. You start on a note, you make sure you have every note of the alphabet in there, and then you adjust them with sharps or flats to maintain that whole, whole, half formula. So now that we've got a scale, right? We've figured out a scale, but our original question here was, what is a key, right? So anytime you make a scale, you are making basically what do you want to call it? A template or a blueprint for all sorts of things. So the difference between a G major scale and something in the key of G, it means we're using a G major scale to make all the chords, all the melodies, all the bass lines, stuff like that. And the way we do that is this really cool thing that I like to call the leapfrog method. You start on the first note of the scale, and then you play every other note of the scale until you have 3 notes. And what you end up with is the first chord in the key, also called the 1 chord. And this is where Roman numerals come in. So the 1 chord in the key of G, let's do this. Let's zoom in a little bit. we'll say key of G major is not just about, well, I really can't talk and write at the same time. The key of G major is not just about the scale, but it's about a chord that attaches to each note of the scale. So the one chord is G major, consisting of G, B, and D. And if we mark those notes out, here's G, here's B, here's D, you're going to see a pretty familiar chord here. This is a G major chord. And that makes sense, right? The key of G major, the first chord in the key is going to be a G major chord. Now, of course, we're trying to do this quickly because this is the crash course, but there's chords called major chords and chords called minor chords. The basic difference between these two kinds of chords is that one starts with an interval that is called a major third. Now, of course, this is a crash course, but what the heck is an interval? Well, we've already talked about some intervals. We talked about whole steps and half steps. From G to A, that is an interval. That is basically a measurement of musical distance. And if you measure it in half steps, essentially, you could think of it as a whole step is the equivalent of 2 half steps, right? Well, there's something called a minor third, which would be, ignore all these other notes for a second, but G to B would be a minor third, which is the distance of 1, 2, 3 half steps. And the distance from G to B, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4 half steps, that distance is called a major third. And all chords are made of major thirds and minor thirds, essentially. Again, brevity, but essentially. So for G to B is a major third because we've got whole step, or half step, half step, half step, half step, half step, right? 4 half steps or 2 whole steps. Every major chord starts with an interval of a major third and ends with an interval of a minor third. In other words, from the first to the second note of the chord is a major third, and then the distance from the second note of the chord to the third note of the chord is a minor third. In other words, we've got half step, half step, half step, right? That's a minor third compared to half step, half step, half step, half step, right? We've got 2 whole steps, and then this one is a half step and a whole step, right? That's what makes a major chord, is the distance between these 3 notes. Now, here's the thing. Because these notes are the first, third, and fifth notes of the scale, we just call them the root, the note that the chord is named after, the third, because it's the third note of the scale, and the fifth, because it's the fifth note of the scale. Once we find those notes, we can play them in any order we want. So the reason you play an open G chord like this is because this is the fewest fingers for the most amount of notes to be able to strum. But you can also play a G chord like this. You could also play a G chord like this. You could also play a G chord like this. You could play like this. As long as you're grabbing a G, a B, and a D, you're playing a G chord. So we're not really talking about the key of G yet. We're talking about a G major scale and a G major chord starting on the first note of the scale. Well, this is where things get really cool. So I'm going to erase this this G chord here, and I'm going to talk about what if we start on the second note of the scale and we play every other note again, A, C, E. Well, here we have, I'll put it in blue again, A, C, E. Well, now we've got something called a minor triad, a minor chord, right? A triad is a kind of chord. A triad is a 3-note chord, right? So A to C, hang on a second, that starts with a minor third because we've got whole step, half step. And remember, a minor third is the distance of basically 1, 2, 3 half steps, right? And then it ends with 2 whole steps, which would be a major third. So this is the difference between a major chord and a minor chord. A major chord starts with a major third and ends with a minor third. And a minor chord starts with a minor third and ends with a major chord. this is why sometimes people will say that a minor chord has a flatted third, because I'll show you. If I take this A minor chord and I take the third of the chord, root, third, fifth, and I just raise it, well, now we've just flipped that ratio. Now it goes A to C sharp, that's a major third, and C sharp to E, that's a minor third. So now we have an A major chord. If we flat the third of that chord, we've flipped that ratio from major third, minor third, to now minor third, major third, resulting in a minor chord. So that's the difference between a minor chord and a major chord. Now here's the cool thing. Why don't you find an A major chord in the key of G major? It's because it doesn't fit. There is no C sharp in the key of G major. So the only kind of A chord that could possibly fit in G major is an A minor chord. And it turns out you can do this for every single note in the key. In other words, if we go G, B, D, A, C, E, B, D, F sharp, and then we've got C, E, G, and then we've got D, F sharp, A, E, G, B, and then we've got F sharp, A, C, which we could play like this, and then we're back to G. Now, of all these chords, basically the order that they go in is the first chord in the key, which is called the 1 chord, is major. Second chord, also called the 2 chord, is minor. The 3 chord is minor. The 4 chord is major. The 5 chord is major. The 6 chord is minor. The 7 chord has something weird going on. This is the only chord in the key that goes minor third, minor third. And when you have 2 minor thirds in a row, this kind of chord, this kind of triad, 3-note chord, is called a diminished triad. So the order of chords in a major key goes major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, and then we're back to major. So when you see people using Roman numerals, this is why. Because Roman numerals represent any key, and I'll show you what I mean by that. There's some logic to it that is really beautiful, that you can trust, that just makes your life so much easier. So G major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, and then F sharp diminished. So here's the thing. Roman numerals represent any key. So I have the key of G major here, but it turns out there's a cheat code. If you can figure out the notes in any major scale, you can just use this cheat code of basically major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished. And if you notice, these Roman numerals have this language built in a major key. Because the 1 chord is major, it's always written as an uppercase Roman numeral. And in, here, I'll label those in pink. So the major chords in a major key are always going to be the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. In other words, the chords based on the first note of the scale, the 4th note of the scale, and the 5th note of the scale. The minor chords in the key are always going to be 2, 3, and 6. And then the diminished chord is always going to be 7. So it doesn't matter actually which key you play. The major key always has the same shape. It always has the same kinds of chords in it. For example, if we switch to a different scale, let's switch to the key of D major. Well, now we just got to figure out, you remember the notes in a D major scale, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. Well, what I can do, and I can even do some copy and paste to make it as easy as possible for myself here. I can go, okay, I'm just going to plug the scale in. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp. Bam, those are all the chords in the key of D major. D, major, E minor, F sharp minor, G major, A major, B minor, and C sharp diminished. And I will prove it to you. And the reason you can do this, by the way, is because this major scale formula, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, means, sorry, wrong button, dramatic switch to the wrong scene here. Because that whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half is always the same, it means regardless of what major key you're in, the chords are always going to be the same because, I mean, think about it. If the major scale formula goes whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half, well, that means the distance between the first and second note of the scale is always going to be the same regardless of what key you're in. It means the distance from the first to the third note of the scale always going to be the same regardless of what key you're in. The distance from the first to the fourth note of the scale always going to be the same regardless of what key you're in. It doesn't matter if you're starting on G or if you're starting on, you know, G sharp or on A or on B. Whatever major scale you play, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half makes it so that the chords in a key are always going to be major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished, which is so freaking cool. So how do we use this to actually make music? What do we do with this information? And also, should I backtrack to talk about another basic concept, which is intervals are generally based on the major scale here. For example, intervals are always a distance between two notes, so this can't be an interval because it's just a note, right? But as soon as I play another note, oh, that's a major third. When the distance from the first to the fourth note of the scale is called a perfect fourth. The distance from the first note to the fifth note of the scale is called a perfect fifth. The distance from the first note to the sixth note of the scale is called a major sixth. And the distance from the first note to the seventh note of the scale, assuming you're going all the way up the scale, and not playing, you know, a G sharp and an F right next to each other like this. I forgot how to do it. That would be a half step because F sharp to G here, these two notes are very close together, but when you play a whole scale, that is called a major seventh. And then any one that I said major about, if you flat it, that's a minor seventh, major sixth, minor sixth. This is perfect fifth. You could call it a flat fifth, or you could call it a tritone. This is a perfect fourth, major third, minor third, which should technically be a B flat. And then we've got a whole step, also called a major second. And then we've got G to A flat would be a minor second or a half step. So intervals, little side thing. I told you this is going to be just a crash course, right, on music theory. So back to what do we do with this information now that we've figured out, okay, there's a scale. Okay, there's a set of chords that goes with that scale. Oh, I remember now. I told you I was going to prove to you that the chords in the key of D major are major, D major, E minor, F sharp minor, G major, A major, B diminished, and C sharp diminished. Let me show you how that works first, and then let's make some music, because that is the way, in my opinion, that is the single best way to get comfortable with this kind of information, is to use it to actually communicate your own ideas, just like learning a language. It's not that crazy, right? So here's a D major scale. D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D. If we play the first, third, and fifth note of the scale, well, that's major third, minor third. Hang on. Major third, minor third. So that means that's a major chord. We start on the second note of the scale, every other note, well, that's minor third, and that's a major third. That gives us an E minor chord. If we start on F sharp, when we go every other note, well, that is minor third, major third. Okay, so F sharp minor, just like I said. Then we got G, B, D. Well, that's major. That chord exists in the key of G. We already talked about that one. That's major third, minor third. And then A, C sharp, E. Remember we were saying, why is there a G in there? Get out of there. Get out of there, G. Thank you. Remember I was saying an A major chord doesn't fit in the key of G? Well, it does fit in the key of D major. So that's the 5 chord, 1, 2, every other note. And then we've got the 6 chord made of B, D, and F sharp. There we go, minor. And then C sharp, E, G, there's our diminished chord. So those are the chords in the key of D major. And again, I can't stress this enough. The open chords are called open chords because they tend to be using as many open notes as possible. In other words, the notes that you can play without any fingers, right? Those are open notes. Open chords are designed to be as easy to play as possible, so you can just strum. Bar chords eliminate open notes. That's okay. It's kind of fun. There's different ways to play these chords too, but what I want to do is I'm going to sit down at my desk and show you how to write some music. And maybe we'll even use some recording software today. I'm not sure. We're just having fun. So, where do we go with this? And where did I go? I went over here. So we're going to think of a few different ways to play around with this stuff. First of all, we've got our chords in a key, and I don't know what I'm flailing a little bit here. These are our chords. So what I like to do, I like to make a little grid here. And we can start with just something basic. If we count, we think of each of these little grids as a count of 4. We go, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. From there, I need to find a pick. And then from there, we can do just about anything we want. But let's keep it really simple at first, and then maybe we'll start make it more fancy. So you don't have to start on the 1 chord, but often it sounds a little bit more like it's in the key if you focus on the 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, but you can do whatever you want. I'm going to start with D, then I'm going to go to the 2 chord, because I accidentally played that earlier and it sounded kind of nice. Then I think what I want to do is go to, well, this is the fun part. You can explore. I'm going to try this, D major, E minor, G, B minor. So let's see, I got D major, E minor, G, B minor. That's kind of cool. Let me show you a cool trick. I like this progression. What I want to do is I want to double it, and I want to change something about it the second time around, and I think this will be a lot of fun. Copy and paste. And let's see. So I really think that going to an A right here is going to sound really nice. So now I have this whole thing. All I did was I came up with a progression I liked, I doubled it, and then I changed something about it the second time through, and all of a sudden, it sounds great. So I've got D, or I guess you should probably see the progression, so let's do this. D, E minor, G, B minor, and then D, E minor, G, A. One more. That's kind of fun. Let's have even more fun with it though. And I've got some ideas. So, as I was saying before, there are so many things you can do with chords that aren't just playing open chords. We could do what am I doing here? This is just an idea. These are called chord voicings, and there's so many to choose from. There's almost an endless amount. So a D chord is D, F sharp, and A. And what I just did that just sounded cool is I did what are called open voicings. I played D, A, and F sharp, like this, for my D chord. And then for my E minor chord, I played E, B, and G, like this. So here's the D. Here's the E minor. That sounds cool. And then for the G chord, I did something like this. G, and again, G, B, and D. Just if you scroll back on the video and look at the notes that are involved in these chords, all I'm doing is I'm grabbing the most sparse versions of these chords that I can. And now I've got these 3 chords. And for the A chord, I can just scoot this one up and go A, E, and C sharp, which is every other note of the scale starting on A. So these chords sound like this. I've got And what's fun about this kind of thing is I could even change octaves. I could go the G one time down here. I could do a G up here a second time. I could also be more in tune. So if I go D, right, that's kind of fun. Same thing, I'm just finding different places to play it, right? These are really open voicings. But we could also find some totally different voicings of these chords. Let's try, I'll tell you what. I'm gonna write out these notes on the iPad for these specific chords so that we can find them on the, let's see, so that we can find them on the neck of the guitar. So this is D, F sharp, A. This is E, G, B. This is G, B, D. This is B, D, F sharp. And then the only other chord is A, C sharp, E. So these are the actual notes in these chords. I bet we could find some really interesting ways to play them back on the camera guitar over here. So let's try that. And I'll show those notes in there. So here is D, F sharp, and A. Maybe I want to go way up on the fingerboard like this. So maybe I'm going to go up here. There's F sharp, A, and D. That means we're playing a D chord. Here's a E minor chord. Here's another E minor. And I think it's because it's getting hot in here. It's a little... That's kind of cool. So you see, that's literally the same chords as you can't see that low. I'll go up here. Literally the same chords, but because I'm choosing different ways to play them, they can sound very different. It gets even cooler when you add a bass player, which is something we could totally do if we want to mess around with some recording software like this. So let's make a beat, and then I might stop to answer some questions at a certain point here. But let's set up a little beat for this chord progression. I'll try not to spend too much time, but I've got myself a little MIDI keyboard, which if you're not familiar with a MIDI keyboard, this is what I like to use to trigger drum sounds that I can actually record in my recording software, and all of a sudden my buttons for switching scenes are not working. There we go. So let's find a nice tempo for this. I'm gonna go up here and I'm gonna slow this down. Oh, 100's actually a pretty good tempo. I'm gonna turn this down so I can really hear the click. Okay, I like that. I'm gonna take the last take. I hit a button that quantizes it, makes it perfect because I'm not a finger drummer. Then I'm gonna raise that volume way up. Right? Now, I'm gonna do something kind of weird. I'm gonna play those chords first, and I'm gonna show you how a bass player can really bring some chords to life. But first I'm going to make sure I'm at least mostly in tune here, so. And it would appear I'm not even plugged in, so give me a sec here. There we go. It gets hot under these lights. By the way, yes, this is a live lesson. Feel free to say hi in the chat. And I'll stop and answer some questions in a bit here. So let's see, since this is an 8 measure long thing here, I'm gonna make this 8 measures long, and I'm gonna try not to make any mistakes so that I can do this quickly. But let's do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I have recorded that thing on the guitar. I'm going to turn it down a little bit. I might pan it to one side. And again, I want to clarify that I definitely just recorded pretty much exactly what I played before with the, and I'll even zoom in on my neck a little bit better here so you can see what I'm talking about from a different angle. I was definitely just playing the D major, E minor, G chord, and B minor, and then back to D, E minor, G to A. It looks a lot different without the camera guitar, but it's the same chords, just without the very obvious dots there, right? So now that I have this thing recorded, first of all, let me just review what just happened music theory wise. I helped you figure out the chords in the key of D major. I helped you understand a little bit about what it means to be in a key, but I want to really clarify. When we came up with this this chord progression, that is basically you can call it in Roman numerals, you can call it a 1, 2, 4, 6, and then 1, 2, 4, 5. That is the Roman numerals for that chord progression. And this chord progression, because it's using chords in the key of D and only in the key of D, it's called a chord progression in the key of D major. And I know I realize I'm using the definition in the word for what it means to be in a key, but what it means to be in a key is to just use only notes from a given scale to make chords, to make bass lines, which we're about to do, and to make melodies, which we're about to do. Again, only using a D major scale. And we're not, at no point so far have I just played a D major scale, which is super boring, right? I mean, not in the, I played it to show you how we get the chords, but I haven't used it in a musical setting, right? The scale isn't something that comes up very often when you're actually playing music. You might play fragments of that scale sometimes in a melody, but the scale is mainly there as the blueprint to get all the chords. And the chords are really the core thing that makes a key what it is. So here we have a chord progression that we've recorded. I'm now going to write a bass line to this chord progression, and we'll see how it goes, but I think it'll be fun. Let me just swap out my guitar for my bass, and here we go. And of course I'm getting tangled up in all these cables because wow, there's so many cables everywhere. This is a very fun and also very technically wonky job. Never mind, it's like 90 degrees in here right now. Also, I'm just gonna stop and say, hey, if you like what I'm doing, I go live every Thursday to answer questions from my patrons over on Patreon. I just did my 200th live stream. I do it every week. I spend at least an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, just answering whatever questions have come up for you that week. I also have hundreds of lessons available on things exactly like what we're talking about right now. Music theory, how it applies to the guitar. I have courses about this kind of stuff. If you like what I do here, that is not only the best way to support me, but it's also a way to get a really good education for $12 a month. Not only is it worth it, but it's also my job, so you'd literally be supporting me if you wanted to check out my school. Anyhow, let's write a bass line, and I'll talk to you about how that works. I already have a nice bass tone set up. So the gist of a bass line is the bass player's job, essentially, if you want to make it as simple as possible, is to emphasize the root note of each chord. And I could do that pretty easily. And I could also just double check that I'm in tune in this very hot room. I'm in tune enough. So with just playing root notes, in other words, remember all these chords, right? D, E minor, G, B. And then D, E minor, G, A. I could do that, and that would be a pretty simple way to just sort of accent these notes. I could do it with no rhythm and just do something like this. It's kind of cool. So I'm going to turn the bass down just a touch, but I could do that. Nothing's stopping me from doing that. But what I can also do is I can mute the bass for a second and I can listen to the kick drum. And I can use that as a little reference for what I could play on the bass. And that would be another cool starting point. It's not going to sound amazing, but right, that sounds more interesting. That sounds cool. Another thing I could do is I can use that as a basic cue. And I can use, again, notes from the scale. And I can actually use notes from the chord because, as we talked about, root, third, and fifth, well, that's mainly what's going on for the bass, too. Except bass players don't play thirds nearly as often. Bass players play root and fifth a little more often So I'm going to play the root, which is D, and it, just as a little refresher here, let's go back to the iPad real quick. We've got root, third, fifth of this D chord, and then we've got root, third, fifth of this E minor, root, third, fifth. So the bass player is essentially going to say, I'm going to mostly ignore the third here. And of course, like I said, music theory isn't prescribing what you have to do. There's definitely bass players that play the third, but generally speaking, a lot of bass players focus mostly on root and fifth. And there's, again, obviously exceptions, but this is a great starting point for you if you're trying to figure out how to write bass lines. So if we go here and we just focus on roots and fifths, I can go root, 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 fifth, root, 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 fifth, root, 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 fifth, and it's going to sound pretty good. Check it out. And all I'm doing is roots and fifths. Sounds pretty cool, right? This is like bass player home zone. From there, we can follow some rules where maybe we want to we can do a little bit of walking where if it makes sense rhythmically, like I can go root, root fifth, walk to the root note of the next chord is kind of a cool thing. Maybe that's what I'm going to do, is just something like that. So and what I just did there is I did a root and then a fifth and then an octave. And you could kind of think, if you're playing much bass ever in your life, the sort of bass player home bass that I like to think about is anytime you play a note on the bass, the fifth is always going to be the next string down and 2 frets up, and then the octave is going to be here. And this is your... right, that's like your bass, home bass. It's essentially a power chord, but you don't often, depending on the genre you play, you don't often actually strum on the bass. But are you, in the chat here, those of you especially who've been watching from the beginning, are you starting to see now how music theory can be so helpful for just the basics of like, what does it mean to write music? What does it mean for something to be in a key? How can I play along with other people? What does it mean to play a chord progression? All this stuff. I hope you're finding this very helpful. So from here, sorry, I got carried away for a second. From here, you know, we could think about writing a melody. There's all kinds of things we could do. We could also think about adding like a keyboard part. And what does it mean? What does it mean to even add a keyboard part? How does this relate to the guitar? Well, there's something really cool going on, and that is the keyboard relates to the guitar exactly, because the guitar has a set of notes in a certain order, and the keyboard has a set of notes in a certain order. And let's just talk about this for a second. Let me make sure I have a sound. Good. I do have a sound. Okay, and then we'll go here. So on a keyboard, we've got a C. You can always find C because it's, take the set of 2 black ones, and then that's always down from there. So here's C, here's D. Now the keyboard is set up, I'm gonna go an octave higher, to just have half steps everywhere. So those are all just half steps. And as you can see, the keyboard lays out really nicely where those, remember we talked earlier that E and F don't have a sharp between them, and B and C don't have a sharp or flat between them. Well, there's your E and F, and there's your B and C. So a D major scale on the keyboard is going to go whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So now I can say, okay, if I play every other note, which I'm going to do it upside down, this is going to be very weird. That's every other note of a D major scale, starting on D. This is very hard. Every other note starting on E, but it's the same exact concept. So when I'm playing chords on the keyboard, I'm literally playing the same notes I was playing on guitar, but it's going to sound and feel a little different because it's a different instrument. And keyboards have this cool thing where they can kind of hang on a note for a long time. So I think whatever I play on the keys is going to blend really nicely with whatever I'm doing on guitar, and it's going to kind of ground things because I'm going to play just basically pads. I'm probably going to add a whole bunch of reverb to it as well. Let's see. Woohoo. A lot of reverb. I'm also going to put it in the other ear like this. Let's see. Yeah. So now, if I hit record, I'm going to go. And of course, I accidentally recorded over my bass line. That's no problem. But so now that we have some stuff figured out, you have any questions for me? Does this sound interesting? Sound cool? Oh, Jamie Isaacs says, are there any rules of thumb for creating chord progressions for a verse, chorus, bridge, tag, etc.? There aren't necessarily like really specific guidelines, but generally speaking, it's more about the complexity. Verses tend to be more complex, choruses tend to be more simple. Lyrically, choruses tend to be like, this is the main point of the song, this is the concept, this is the idea, and verses tend to be like, let's push the storyline along. And so I would say there's probably different schools of thought for different genres or different people, but it's really one of those things that it's like, choruses tend to be choruses because they are repetitive and simpler in the same way every time, and verses tend to be different every time, which leaves room for them to be a little more complex. But there's no hard and fast rule. Something I like to think about, though, is if I want to write a different section to a song, I might just kind of take note of the chords that I've already used. For example, here I've already used D, E minor, G, B minor, and I've used almost all the chords, but the ones I've used the most often are right here. So what I might do is I might go, okay, if I'm going to write a next section here, I'm probably going to not start with D, and I'm not going to start with D and E minor. Maybe I might start with A, or maybe I'll go A, F sharp minor, or something. And then G to D or something like that. Just something different, right? There aren't hard and fast rules other than, if you think about writing a story, if the same thing keeps happening to your character with no changes each time it happens, it's going to feel like not very interesting, right? Because you're like, oh, This happened again. Not surprising, not interesting. But if you have your chorus and your verse different from each other in some way, and I mean, there are a lot of songs that have the same chords for the chorus and the melody. In fact, I should put a link in the description of this video for my band. I just mixed 4-song EP that's going to come out in a couple weeks here. But we have a song on there, on that album, called Heat Stroke, that is basically the same chords for the verse and the chorus. It's just played a little bit differently, and there's a different melody for each section. It makes it feel different. Other songs have wildly different verses and choruses. Part of what it means to just like get into the groove of writing music in general and like finishing songs and putting them out is learning how to write music by just trying and usually failing, trying to write a whole bunch of different things and seeing what works and what doesn't work, and sort of exploring that for yourself and letting it be okay that you might fail pretty often, or maybe 1 out of 5 songs you actually like that you write or something like that. But yeah, there's some stuff to think about, Jamie Isaacs. Let's see if we have any other questions coming up here. Yeah, no questions. Okay, well, I guess I just want to say thanks for hanging out. Thanks for enjoying this lesson. And, maybe I got to preach for a minute. So let's go to Guitar Church for a second. So listen up. Part of the reason I'm doing this video is to shamelessly say, hey, come check out my school. It is the place where I make a living, and there's room for more. Come learn some stuff about music theory. Come learn about the guitar. Come learn how to make music. And when I get questions along the lines of, how do I write a different chord progression for a verse or a bridge or a tag or whatever, part of the answer to that question really comes down to like learning how to practice writing. Because writing isn't something that you magically can suddenly do once you learn enough guitar. Writing music is a totally separate thing that takes practice. It takes time. It takes dedication. It takes curiosity. It takes a lot of failure. And on my Patreon, I have this pretty awesome thing that I do every week where I give people a writing prompt. And sometimes it's a music theory writing prompt, like write something in the key of D major, or write something in E minor, or write something in harmonic minor or melodic minor. Sometimes it's write something that sounds sad. Sometimes it's, write something using this drum track or using this track that I made for you, like all kinds of writing prompts. And the idea here is almost nobody writes a whole song. I don't even write a whole song when I do these things, because the goal is not to write a whole song every time you sit down to write. The idea is to start by just getting your sketchbook, just, quick little sketches of things. And when I'm using this as an analogy for this, right? Think about the way an artist will go, okay, there's this tree. I'm just going to do a 5-minute sketch of this tree. Wow, I really like it. I might come back and paint it later. But for now, I'm just going to do a quick sketch. And the more you get the hang of doing quick sketches like that on the guitar, the easier it gets to write more complex things, sort of like the painter. Start by just drawing something, then draw something with shading, then draw something with 2 colored pencils, then draw something with all the colors, right? You got to do it in steps. So HP says, what is the best topic to start learning when it comes to guitar theory? The best topic to start learning is to keep in mind that music theory is actually for every instrument. It applies the same to everyone. It's just that different instruments have different advantages and disadvantages when it comes to certain things, right? A saxophone can only play 1 note at a time. It can never play a chord, right? Guitar can play 1 note at a time and can play a chord. A trumpet can hold a note and it will be the same volume for the entire time they're holding it. Guitar tends to dip almost immediately, and the sustain on those notes doesn't last as long, right? These are different things about different instruments. So music theory, the stuff we talked about today applies to all instruments everywhere. So learning music theory first, and then thinking about how that stuff applies to your particular instrument. And guitar theory, I would say, is how does music theory apply to guitar? Well, first, learn some basic music theory, and then applying it to guitar will make a lot more sense, right? Don't try to learn guitar theory before you just learn music theory. And that's why I suggest my school. The only reason I did this virtual background is I wanted to take you to church, kind of for fun, but sometimes I also use this background so that I can like jam and have what I'm recording at the same time. But all that to say, I think it's time to call it a day. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. Thanks for being here. I want to do this more regularly, but in the meantime, if you don't see me here for a while, come check out my school. I think you'll really appreciate it. Oh, HP says, let me rephrase my question. Let's see your rephrased question. I'm a beginner guitar player. What is the best topic to start off with when it comes to music theory, specifically for guitar? If you're a beginner guitar player, learn the chords in a key. Learn the concept of chords in a key. And you can learn that on my Patreon. I'm sure you can find ways to learn it on YouTube as well. But the stuff we talked about today is the most important stuff to learn if you're a guitar player, in my opinion. Learning about what is a key and what to do. Sajal says, is there anything in your courses which could help me play more like the Grateful Dead? Yes, learning music theory will help you play like anyone you want, because you'll be able to listen to a song and go, oh, I see what's going on here. The Grateful Dead has some music theory concepts that they implement often. Some modes that they like to play in. There's, even thinking about certain licks people play, you can talk about those licks in music theory language, which helps you translate them to other keys or to other situations or to other concepts. Really helpful stuff. I don't know if I can stress this enough, but my goal, which admittedly is a pretty lofty goal, but the goal of my school is to basically set you up to be whatever kind of guitar player you want to be by teaching you these core concepts that apply to every genre of music. Classical guitar, jazz guitar, rock, indie, singer-songwriter, all of those great musicians use music theory, whether they are really, really deliberately thinking about music theory or whether they, by ear, have figured out common music theory concepts. It's a pretty cool thing. So, yeah, there's a free 7-day trial if you want to come check it out. Yeah, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next time. I'm going to figure out how to leave. Goodbye. And I'm going to get some water, too.